best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work there, too. Those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Sackheads
Radio.
Sackheads
Radio.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America.
Oh,
Hey, Danny.
Into the silo.
you must have the wrong number.
I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.
Sorry, folks, and welcome to the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. So much to talk about this evening. Obviously, the point of topic is going to be the San Bernardino shootings and everything that's going on in Southern California right now. I am your host, Sackhead Sean. I am going to be joined this evening by Dan the Man Butcher to talk about all the incidents. Pundit Press has had the coverage all day. And he's going to get us up to date. He actually has some news. Literally just got a message saying that he needs to come on right now to discuss, so we'll have that. I did just call the wrong number trying to get Dan on because this is the professional radio show we have here at Sackheads, folks. Information's just starting to pour out. Literally in the last 2 minutes or in the last 5 minutes, San Bernardino County Police Department detonated an explosive device that was found inside the building on Waterman Boulevard, the initial point of contact or the initial attack location. On the phone with me right now, I believe, is Dan the Man Butcher. Dan? Hello, Dan. Danny. And he's not there. I'll give him a second to see if he comes in. Here's what we know so far. Earlier this afternoon, 3 individuals walked into a facility on Waterman Drive, and they opened fire, killing, I believe 17 people is the last number. 14 people killed, 17 injured. And then they fled. They fled in a black SUV. There were some questions as to whether or not that information was right. They couldn't confirm it. They weren't sure the numbers of the number of people who were involved. Dan's telling. This is when it's really, really fun to be a one-man show, is when you have a whole bunch of stuff going on right at the same time. But I'll get it figured out, folks. There was, at some point, a bolo, a be on the lookout, put out to all police officers. And one officer saw a vehicle matching the description, attempted to make a traffic stop or investigate the vehicle where a gunfight broke out. I was actually listening to the San Bernardino County Police radio traffic at that time, and there had to be, without a doubt, 70-plus shots fired. You saw them up overhead very, very shortly after, on the news rather, very shortly after the shooting. There was one body lying dead on the ground, one terrorist, another body inside the vehicle, and a third party allegedly fled. And that party still, we believe, to be outstanding. There's been a couple people detained, but they haven't confirmed that third person's in custody. Here we go. Now I'm getting Dan calling. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get everything going at once here.
Oh, not a problem, Sean. You and I have been having phone problems all day.
It's just one of those things. Technology is a beautiful thing. It gives us a ton of information that we need, but it can also be a horrible, horrible adversary. Just before I went to the air, you said you had some breaking news you want to discuss. Why don't you start with that, and then we can back up a little bit and kind of cover the whole day and the suspect information.
Okay, just to make sure, have you announced the names of Syed's brother and of the female suspect?
No, I had not. I hadn't had that information yet.
Okay, well, that's the information I've got for you. So, just like we've been doing all day long on Pundit Press, we've been the front runner. A lot of the national a lot of the networks and stuff have been sourcing us, which has been nice. So here we are again, kind of at the forefront.
Well, and you know what, Dan? I say it all the time. You're the second best newsman in the business, and if I had to take a guess, I would say you're shooting for the number one spot based on what Pundit Press has done today.
Well, I have a lot to live at for that number one spot. Anyway, moving on, the brother in this, his name is, and I'm going to mispronounce this, but the brother is Syed Mazoula, is named as the brother of Syed Farag. I'm mispronouncing these, I know. Mazoula may or may not have been killed in the shootout with police. We're still waiting for confirmation on that. The female suspect in this that helped carry out these attacks, her name was Susana Ramos. Susana Ramos was apparently a convert to Islam, and of course, we'll have more information on her later on. She was actually killed in the SUV by police after the shootout. If you do go to punditpress.com, my guys I just now noticed, they have posted Facebook information on the brother. And they have also posted Facebook information or YouTube information on the brother as well. So once again, we've got all kinds of information coming out on these folks. I do have some interesting stuff on the first suspect that was named today, which Pundit Press was the first national news outlet to actually name the first suspect today, and of course that being Saeed Farouk. I want to. This comes from a reporter that was interviewing a man that claimed to be Farouk's father, who described Saeed Farouk as a very religious Muslim. Quote, the dad said, "I haven't heard anything. He worked in the county office. He's married and has a kid. We're estranged because my wife got the divorce, and they are together. She doesn't want to see me." Farouk said he hasn't seen his son in some time. The father went on to say he was a very religious. He would go to work, come back, go to pray, come back. He's a Muslim. So that's a very interesting development. And of course, I don't know if you were talking about right now the bomb squad is currently on site dealing with some explosive devices. They've deployed the bomb disposal robot. Police say they don't know whether to expect a controlled explosion. There's a big bag in the street. The bomb robot was near the bag but backed away. Police then asked reporters to move back another block. So that's the latest developments that we have, Sean.
Well, and like I said, there's concerns that much like, and you're drawing comparisons, and I agree, to the Boston Marathon bombers, right. And specifically the pursuit that ended in Watertown, Massachusetts, with the shootout with the police. They were throwing the kettle bombs or the pressure cooker bombs then. Right. During this pursuit, which it was a pursuit for a short time before it got into the gunfight, they allegedly were throwing things out the window. I know when they're checking the residences of one of these guys, they're concerned about booby traps within the residence, which they've seen before. Most recently comes to mind is actually the Colorado shooter had his whole house booby trapped, and they had to go in and take care of that. I also know that two females were separately detained leaving the residence in a vehicle, both allegedly per San Bernardino County Sheriff's radio, to be of Arabic descent. This is, if this isn't ISIS in America, I don't know what is. We can talk about what the specific motivation will be later on. I have a feeling, because the incident happened at a workplace party, and I said this to you in private messenger, I'm sure that the president's going to come out and call this workplace violence. There was initial reports that the first guy that was identified, sorry, I don't have all the names straight yet, now I'm trying to catch up to it. there it is, that Farouk entered the party before the incident and got into some sort of verbal altercation, and then came back a short time later with the other two, and that's when the shooting began. Now, I have a feeling that he arrived at that party to make himself, to make sure that the intelligence was good. There was as many people there as he thought. He found the layout, etc., etc. This was a rented facility. It wasn't something that his organization normally works at. It was rented for this specific party, from what we're being told right now. But he knew how many people, what time would be in a small open place that didn't have any cubicles or anything else. It's a wide open field. He must have known how many people about would be attending, and he chose that. I have a feeling that he probably said something. One of the common traits with terrorists, specifically of Muslim descent, if you will, they usually use some sort of stimulant prior to their attack, and that way they can be as fast and as strong as they can possibly be during the attack. You talk about gestational period for stimulant to enter your system, depending on how you inject it, depending on what it is specifically, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. If it's methamphetamine that's smoked immediately as well as snorted, I don't know, but I'm guessing that there will be ingestion done on at some point. If he was already under the influence, that could have been the reason for the confrontation. He lost his head, he got a little excited, said something, whatever. Either way, he leaves, comes back, the shooting begins. And that's really where kind of we pick up the story and start throwing out some of the evidence that we have. I can tell you, and this is where the media bias drives me insane, the CNN was all over the place talking about how these two had AR-style rifles.
Yes.
And that drove me insane because the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, while they were approaching the vehicle, specifically stated that they were AK-47s. And now, why is that a big deal? They're both long guns. They're both semi-automatic. AKs can be converted to fully auto far easier than an AR can be. Both could be if you want them to be. But it is the hallmark of terrorists in the Middle East to have an AK-47, whereas it is very American, if you will, to have an AR-15. And, you know, I always talk about the subtle hints that the news kind of throws out there to try to deflect or push things in a certain direction. Hell, when all this was breaking, one of their pundits, who was the former head of the U.S. Marshals, was talking about how he thought this was the act of a sovereign citizen. And I said, no. Where have we seen, most recently, three-man fire teams enter, have an expedient or very, very quick flash attack? It's timed. They knew how long it took law enforcement to get there. They also know, because if he is an employee of the county or the state or just about any business nowadays, they also know what the active shooter plan is for that facility or where they work or just what the norm is, right? Anyone in a workplace these days, you have some sort of active shooter training. What to do if a guy with a gun walks in and starts being insane. So they know that. They knew that it was further enough away from downtown that the response would be delayed. It was about 6 to 8 minutes, I believe. They got out, fled in the vehicle. I have a feeling that after they fled, they were either planning on meeting and doing a second attack or split up and do 3 separate attacks because there was only 2 inside the vehicle when it was stopped by police. The third is still at large, we believe. Or is at large. It has not been confirmed that he's in custody yet or deceased. So, and then they went back to the area, and I have a feeling that was out of just sheer conceited, I want to see what we just did. And that's when the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department located the vehicle and the pursuit began. So you already have, and we'll get into this in a little bit, we already have the left throwing their spin on it, and I actually just had a lovely Facebook argument with a friend of mine who's a anti-gun nut over this, and immediately this country has a problem because we don't want to either wait to find out what those investigating actually determined was the cause. There are those of us who can speculate, and we have that luxury. I don't have to testify in a court, so I can speculate that I believe that this is some sort of Muslim extremism, be it ISIS-inspired or whatever. But But, for them to come out and immediately start talking about gun rights tells me that the left knows what this is as well, because they want to go after the gun, not the person that pulled the trigger.
Right. Earlier today, former CIA case officer Robert Baer said that the most disturbing aspect of this attack today was it carried out using a lot of the same tactics that we are seeing used in the Middle East. He said, what I don't like about this shooting is multiple shooters, IEDs. Mm-hmm. I say this very reluctantly because this has the hallmarks of the sort of attacks you see in the Middle East. Former FBI Special Agent Robert Chacon agreed with Baer's assertions. One of our sources that we've been talking to on the ground in San Bernardino this afternoon says this. We're talking about the similarities between this and Boston. This one was really too eerie, and I talked with you about this earlier. A resident of Richardson Street said that one of the suspects, he believes, was in a boat in the back of his neighbor's house, which is an image reminiscent of the ending of the Boston Marathon bombers' manhunt. Another resident said that her 14-year-old daughter is home alone down Richardson Street, where the crime scene is currently being blocked off, and police will not allow the mother to go see her. Also, earlier today, President Obama was giving an interview to CBS News, which was abruptly cut short. And during the aspect of this interview, President Obama went to his usual rhetoric that he goes to this, blaming it on guns, how we need to have more gun control, da-da-da-da-da. At the very moment he was giving that interview, it couldn't have been better timing. All of a sudden, the FBI comes out and says, we are speculating that this could possibly be terrorism. So then all of a sudden, the terrorism aspect comes in. President Obama is forced to retract and stop and back off of his comments all of a sudden. I do believe sources have said that President Obama is scheduled to fly to California tomorrow. I haven't confirmed that. That came to me kind of as a secondhand source coming in. Some members of the Department of Homeland Security are traveling with him. Mm-hmm. I know I shared this with you on Facebook, and I said this half jokingly, but guys, this is going to be the narrative that we're going to hear from the administration on this. I guarantee you. I shared with you and Kim that the Obama administration is going to say what happened today in San Bernardino is a perfect example of climate change. Climate change caused the drought, which caused the Muslims to become irritated at the state wasting water while being kept wondering when the bullet chain would be finished. So,
I said workplace violence. That's the type of narrative
you continue to hear from these guys.
Oh, I think this is going to be workplace violence, right? It was a work event that he was at, so therefore there's no other motivation other than he's angry at work. So it's going to be workplace violence in the president's opinion. It's insanity to me. And part of the argument that I've had before, and I will have it to the day I die, we're not blaming the people who are responsible for it. For these sorts of acts. And look at one of the immediate distinctions that were made, or correlations, if you will, that were made, were to the Colorado shooter just this past weekend. And they're like, well, this guy's no different than that. And I said, you're right. If his motivation is political, religious, or otherwise, and he's using that to try to make political change through fear in this country, he is a terrorist. And I have no problem calling that guy in Colorado a terrorist if that was his true motivation. And you know what? Throw him to Guantanamo. I don't care. Line him up, firing squad. I don't care. But the reality is, I have no problem doing it. They should have no problem doing it. I said to you earlier, when I'm watching CNN and they're doing everything they can, the anchors, to not say the word Muslim or terrorist, it is mind-boggling to me.
And that's and you will not hear the terms Islamic terrorism.
Nope.
You're not. They're going to try to, they're going to try to downplay any ties whatsoever to terrorism. They'll say, well, they'll use the usual lone wolf scenario, even though these guys were probably radicalized in some way. Just the same applied to to the Boston bombers. They were radicalized by somebody, by a source. And that goes back to the original sources, no matter what it is. And the ties will ultimately come back to terrorism. You know, you have the Obama administration claiming that the number one threat to the United States today, this morning, still claiming the number one threat to the homeland is climate change, not terrorism, not radical Islamic terrorism. They will say the biggest terrorism threat will be, they will actually use the term rednecks, will be the number one terrorist threat. They still see the likes of Timothy McVeigh as the number one terrorist threat to our country. They do not want to recognize that the actual that the most dangerous threat that we have is radicalized Islamic terrorists are the biggest threat. I did a report yesterday on Pundit Press that we now know that we have over 1,000 active social media people actively recruiting for ISIS that the FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security know about, that are actively recruiting members for ISIS here in the United States. And then you have this Syrian refugee nonsense where they're wanting to bring these folks into the country when we know that there are terrorists embedded in them. And the mere fact that the Obama administration refuses to acknowledge that we know for a fact that we have sleeper cells here in the United States waiting to act, whether they are directly linked to the Islamic State or some other radicalized Islamic terrorist organization, or whether they have just been radicalized on their own. They've had to have some contact, some type of training. You cannot tell me, just to give you some background on Saeed Farouk, this guy by profession is a business taxes representative for the California State Board of Equalization. He was a 2003 graduate of La Sierra High School and studied finance at California State Fulton University. Somebody had to train this guy. Somebody had to train him. Somebody had to train his brother. Somebody had to train the lady that was part of this today. Somebody had, because this was, you've mentioned this already, this was a very well organized attack. Whether he was attacking people they worked with or whatever, they knew the layout of the business. They had a plan. They knew the layout of the location. They went in, went on the murderous shooting spree they had, and then left within 3 minutes, folks. They killed 14 people, seriously injured 17 others in less than 3 minutes. They were in and out and gone. They were gone before the police even got there. So they had this planned out. But somebody had to train them to do this, and they have to somewhere. They've got to talk to these folks. If any of them if the one brother is actually still alive, they've got to be able to trace this back and say, okay, who trained you? Where is your contact? Right.
Well, and
there's got to be a link there.
You know as well as I do. You have to look into their history. I'm being told, or I've read earlier, that they're of Qatari descent. Did they go back to visit relatives in recent years? They'll have to do a scrub on their computers. A lot of them are starting to use what's called the dark internet or the deep internet, depending on how you want to do it. But this is too, and Ken is in the chat room right now, these are two attacks, Paris and San Bernardino, that went completely under the intelligence radar.
Exactly. And how did it go underneath the intelligence radar? It went under the intelligence radar because the intelligence does not know where these sleeper cells are.
Exactly.
and you're looking at it, and look at how, once again, look at how mundane the 9/11 terrorists were. Look at the type of professions that they came from. College graduates, professionals. Professional by business degree. This fits the same identical mode that the 9/11 terrorist carried out. these guys are usually well educated. They have family lives. They go to work every day. They look like they have happy marriages, and then all of a sudden, they are awakened.
Well, the first
sleeper cell is awakened, and then they carry out what they want to do.
The first thing they're told is not to change anything you do in life.
Bingo.
While you're getting ready, assume everything is normal. Act as if everything is normal. You know, one of the other things to look at as we're coming up on the break on the bottom of the hour is we reported a couple months ago, and I believe you had it on Pundit Press as well, is just south in Mexico, there were conversations about Islamic training camps. Yes. San Bernardino is L.A. It's not far from Mexico. And if this guy's an American citizen, as long as he had a passport, he can get in and come back very easily. So, you know, you start talking about training fields, but as Agador in the chat room is talking about, you know, there are alleged training sites all over this country that people have talked about ad nauseum. New York has a couple of them where, you know, they almost try to mask it. They almost try to mask it like their own small community, almost like the Amish, if you will, where they move to an area and they, you know, out in the county, and they have a couple houses and they have people live there, and we just want to be left alone to live our life. And then you come to find out it looks more and more like they're having training camps on property. It is not anything that is new as far as the information. It is not anything at all shocking for those of us who have said time and again, this is going to happen because we don't do enough to stop it. You know, it's hard when you're a conservative to talk about the Patriot Act, right? And I'm against the Patriot Act per se. But does that mean that we shouldn't be monitoring specific places that we know have a tendency to draw out terrorists? Absolutely not. Of course we should. You know what I mean? There's a reason why they have gunshot indicators in some neighborhoods, because there's a lot of gunshots there and they want to know right away and try to locate it. We know where there are some problems in this country. There's a reason the NYPD was surveilling mosques all over New York and New Jersey until they were told to stop. We know with all the incidents that happened out of Boston in that year-and-a-half period, we know that there was somebody in one of those mosques or moving around between mosques that was attempting to radicalize people. We know that by the Tsarnaev brothers. He was radicalized, Tamerlan was radicalized before he went to get his training in Chechnya. We know he was radicalized. We had another incident about 6-8 months ago, or a couple different incidents now, where they arrested 3 people for conspiracy, and then another guy who tried to stab a police officer in the name of ISIS, and then he had co-conspirators that are arrested. Same thing. You should be looking at mosques in Boston because there's obviously a problem in that area with people being radicalized.
Exactly. And just to reconfirm, we do know for a fact that 2 of the suspects are dead and 1 of the suspects is in custody. So
is in custody. Good.
Exactly which brothers are dead, we don't know. So, but we do know that the female suspect is dead, but which one of the brothers was killed at this point, we don't know at this point.
Well, we'll talk about it more here after the break on the Sackheads Radio Show live in the SHR Media Network. Dan Butcher will stick around. We will be back in 3 right here. Stick around.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
Business. You didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cough was stupid, bro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reverb Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time. Every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on shrmedia.com, you will catch the Reverb Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on shrmedia.com.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here's Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
And welcome back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And welcome back to the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. Editor-in-Chief of Pundit Press, Mr. Dan the Man Butcher, joins us on the phone. We're, of course, discussing the shooting incident down in San Bernardino County. 2 of the suspects are now dead. 1 is in custody. There has not been clarification as to who is who as far as dead and in custody. We know that 14 people are dead, 17 more are injured. They detonated, and I believe it's already been done, they have detonated a item that was left at the building that they dragged outside. They were very concerned that it was going to be a very loud detonation and large detonation. They did 3 separate detonation charges on it, according to San Bernardino's radio. And so that kind of tells you that there was so much there that they had to destroy to make it safe. They had to go with 3 separate charges. Just all scary stuff. We're talking about essentially where do we go from here as a country? You know, you brought up, Dan, that these refugees are coming, and as much as the president's going to allow it, and there's not much states can do to stop it. We can talk about a whole bunch of different things, but at the end of the day, it doesn't mean they're not going to be here.
That's true, and there's not a lot that we can do to stop it at this point. I actually, where I live in the state of Texas, my hometown of Amarillo, Texas, in the last couple of years has been actually the largest recipient of refugees into the state of Texas have been introduced into our area. A lot of them from Sudan, a lot of them from the Middle East. So we've seen a lot of that here into my particular area, and I can tell you that it has strained the resources to the max, whether it be medical, whether it be social services, whether it be the school district, because of all the different languages they're having to accommodate. It is just the number that have come in to the area right now, and I can probably assume that this is true for everywhere that they've been brought into. They have stressed the resources to the maximum level. Our local government here is begging and pleading, please do not bring any more refugees in this area. We cannot handle them. I also want to bring up the good folks at CARE are preparing a press conference for 8:30 p.m.
Why would they do that?
Probably going on right now. Well, they have to remind us that there's no such thing as Islamic terrorism. That if you believe in Islamic terrorism or the radicalization of people by Islam, by radical terrorists, that you're an Islamophobe. That is their one thing that they're going to be stressing, that if you're talking about this being Islamic terrorism, that you're an Islamophobe, that you're just barking up the wrong tree. Once again, this was just a case of workplace violence. A disgruntled worker got together with his brother and decided this is what we need to do.
Let's examine that portion for a second. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Let me tell you this real quick, okay. and this will really set you off really quick, okay? The greater Los Angeles area of CARE today called on the FBI to investigate as a hate crime an incident in which an apparently bullet-ridden copy of the Quran, Islam's holy text, was found outside an Islamic clothing store. The owner of the El-Far Islamic clothing store in Anaheim, California, found the English translation of the Quran pierced with multiple holes and hanging on the front door of the store Tuesday morning. So that is what CARE wants you to...
That's the focus.
What they want you to concentrate on, how quote unquote Muslims are being persecuted against, which that is the furthest thing from the truth, ladies and gentlemen. In reality, it is the persecution of Christians that we need to be worried about, not only in the Middle East, but in our own country, Sean.
Well,
so they want you to concentrate on this rather than what happened today in San Bernardino.
Let's back this up for a second. Let's talk about the bullet-riddled Quran left on the front door. And
right.
Listen, if this was truly, and I always caution people, as we saw with Missouri, the University of Missouri, with the threats that got thrown out, and it come to find out that the Twitter threats against the black students was committed by another black former student. So you're going to be, right. You always have to be a little concerned when all of a sudden these things go shot up, or shot up in the media as being like these huge deals and blah, 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 blah. Let's consider the source, right? CARE constantly wants to make sure that you're looking at what they want you to look at and not the reality.
Exactly.
They always want to talk about other people doing things against CARE, but they don't want to talk about the people that they allegedly represent doing other horrific things to people. And they're not standing up against it. That's the amazing part. CARE, by and large, does not come out and say, hey, you know what, these idiots in ISIS are just that, idiots. They're morons. They're lunatics. We don't want anything to do with them. I hope they die. They don't represent us. No. They want to make sure that you know that somebody hung a book on their front door. By the way, it's a scumbag thing to do if somebody did it. You know what I mean?
Hey, Sean.
What?
Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you real quick because this is just now breaking. Okay, this is just coming into us, Pundit Press, that government records are showing that Saeed Farouk, who is a U.S. citizen, traveled to guess where last year? Saudi Arabia.
Aha. Well, and as we saw,
there's the connection.
As we've seen time and again, what happens is they get off in a place that is somewhat American friendly, and then they travel out of the country. That way, their visa doesn't send up a flag.
Right.
Under the radar, they travel out in the road in the middle of the night, and get their training, and then come back, jump on the. I was visiting my family, get their American visa or whatever visa they have, and jump on a plane back home. Same thing happened with the Tsarnaev brothers. We have seen this before. So there's the Middle East connection. There is where the training happened. I can almost guarantee you, probably in Syria. Saudi Arabia is what? It's a 14-hour drive from Syria or something like that, from one end to the other,
right.
I think. So we know, listen, folks, when nobody else has mentioned in the press or the law enforcement or anyone else has mentioned that there was a Muslim connection other than speculation based on name. And obviously, we knew he was a Muslim because, at least Farouk was, because of his YouTube channel, some statement relatives to statements, but it hasn't officially been determined by law enforcement to be a connection to any sort of Muslim group or person. When CARE is scheduling a press conference to do damage control before that is announced, that tells you that even they knew what this was.
Oh, exactly. And once again, but you know, but here's the thing, and I'm going to bring this into the conversation too. That's not going to fit the narrative that the Obama administration is going to want to portray. It certainly did not fit the narrative when you first started hearing the first reports of this today. Every network, every single last network, every single major liberal newspaper today, the first thing that they started reporting on when this story first broke today, okay, and I'm going to use this. This was an exact quote when MSNBC first broke this story today. The Planned Parenthood clinic is only a few blocks away. Now, and then that carried over. The Planned Parenthood narrative started, and they started trying to bring in the Planned Parenthood connection into this shooting. Every liberal network went that route. Ladies and gentlemen, the Planned Parenthood is over 3 miles away from the health center where this took place. And so they were trying as hard as they possibly could to make this about another mass shooting against Planned Parenthood or some type of organization like that, versus what we are now starting to piece together, what is going to be what we know is a radical Islamic terrorist attack. End of discussion. But once again, Sean, they're going to try to downplay that as workplace violence, just like they tried to do that with Fort Hood and every other time we see an attack like this. They're going to try to downplay the connection between Mr. Farouk and traveling to Saudi Arabia. They're going to try to downplay all that and once again say, you know what, these were just these were just two random brothers that got together and they were just acting out. What did society do? What did society do to make these brothers act out? What did society do to make this young lady that joined these two brothers to act out? Where did we hear that narrative before, Sean? We heard it in your hometown of Boston, Massachusetts.
Yep.
And that, I guarantee you, tomorrow morning, that will be the narrative that you're going to see in the liberal networks.
Absolutely. I just did a little bit of research, and it is a 20-hour drive from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to Raqqa, Syria, using the main roads. 20 hours. How long was he in Saudi Arabia for? I guarantee you, very rarely do people go home to the Middle East for a week or two. Usually once they go home for a visit, it's for a couple months. So, and, you know, it passes through Iraq where there's no real border security there. So it's pretty simple, right? And this isn't all that hard to put together. The question is why was he not on a list? Why was he not being watched? Because you don't just travel without any information whatsoever to Syria via Saudi Arabia, and I'll tell you right now, it's Syria, somewhere in the Middle East. Syria, you can go all over the place and get terrorist training, I'm sure. Why, or how did he do that blindly? He didn't. He had to have communication ahead of time. There had to be research ahead of time. All those things need to be looked at. And like I said, their computers we scrub down, but it's too little too late, right? You know, we hear all the time about how our intelligence is supposed to do X, Y, and Z, but I guarantee you, much like we saw with the Fort Hood shooter, you are going to see a lot of these incidents in which government and the law enforcement knew of these people, but they probably didn't do anything because they're afraid to get sued. You know, local law enforcement, the FBI, and I know we can talk about the administration and all that stuff, but DOJ, all those folks, when it comes to this sort of thing, they kind of operate autonomously in a lot of ways. Something like this, something like France, where the intelligence was missed huge, is going to be a question that really needs to get answered on Capitol Hill. One of our chatters in the chat room, White Mamba, is saying that Fox News Channel is reporting the second suspect is a Qatari citizen.
Right.
And that would tie in because we said the first brother was of Qatari descent, who came to America and naturalized. So it's possible that the Qatari citizen was the one who had all the training and then came over here.
Right.
But
let me give you this real quick, Sean, because my guys are feeding me information just as fast as they can. I want to come back to this real quick, but government records show that Farouk, a U.S. citizen, traveled to Saudi Arabia last year. They're already starting to downplay it. Authorities don't automatically attach any importance to that trip, but they are investigating his background. David Bodich, Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Los Angeles office, said, terrorism is a possibility, but we don't know that yet, and we're not willing to go down that road yet.
Well, and that's, listen, that's bull.
Exactly.
It's almost like hanging out in front of a drug house, right? You only do that if you're there to buy drugs.
Right.
You can't tell me you're going to Saudi Arabia to visit family, and then all of a sudden you become radicalized and kill 14 people in a state office building and injure 17 more, and have explosives, and had an escape plan, and had team training where they actually had a fire team. They moved in a military manner. They dressed in military-style clothing, as they said. They had tactical gear on them. They were prepared, as we saw most recently in France. So this is not a shock, and yeah, they're going to downplay it because they can't. Politically correct world won't allow law enforcement to come out and be like, hey, this guy went to Saudi Arabia. You know what that means. They can't do that because, okay, we'll go up in arms and file lawsuits, et cetera, but reality is what it is. You're not going to a house of prostitution to have a beverage. You're not going to a drug house to buy a car. You're going there because they have what you need and you force yourself into it or allow yourself to get pulled into it. So either way, they can downplay all they want, but reality is what it is. This guy went to Saudi Arabia for one reason and one reason alone. I will bet my left leg on it.
Yeah. Here's another interesting development we're just getting. We've got the husband of a wounded shooting victim who's giving her account of what happened inside the room. According to this woman, her name is Annie Kondocker. The husband is Shalahin Kondocker. Annie is an environmental engineer who worked for San Bernardino County. She was inside the conference room when gunfire erupted at around 11 a.m. your time out in California. According to Annie, the shooters who opened fire in the conference room at a California Center for the Developmentally Disabled Wednesday didn't say anything before they started spraying the room with bullets. The husband said. Shalahin Kondocker said they just started shooting. They didn't yell or say anything beforehand, and that's what he said his wife told him. Also, a colleague says that that Saeed Farouk's employer had recently held a baby shower for him. So that goes back into our narrative of them of living a normal life.
Right.
Nobody's suspecting anything, and then all of a sudden, once that sleeper cell is awakened, we see the violence that is expelled when they are called upon to do so.
Well, it also shows you too something that's definitely changing, and I wonder if they're starting to catch on. We've said, I had buddies of mine who came back from the Middle East who served in our country, and they'd all tell you the same thing. A guy shows up and starts yelling Allahu Akbar, you kill him or run, because good things don't necessarily follow that. And that's been something that's been said a lot on this side of the water, if you will, the last couple of years is, you hear that in a public place, somebody screaming out the top of their lungs, you run or shoot if you can do it. I wonder if that's something where they're going to change that. They're not going to make that announcement because then people are hitting the floor and running. They want to have people as blind as possible. I also don't know where this conference room is, but I'd be interested to see how far in it is off the street and how they got in in full military garb and all this other stuff into a state facility undetected, it sounds like, because they made it all the way to the room without nobody knowing they were coming.
Let me put this image in everybody's mind real quick so that they understand this. This particular facility services over 32,000 clients, has over 650 employees. This is a massive facility where this shooting took place. So once again, just the mere magnitude of how big this facility is, the location of the facility, goes to show that there was a lot of meticulous planning that went into this particular attack and how it was carried out, the timing of the attack, the way that they went into the attack, the way that they made their escape, and also how they were armed. They were wearing body armor. Yep. They were ready to encounter. They knew very well that at some point they were going to be engaged by law enforcement officials. That led to why they had the explosives on hand.
Yep.
The explosives, I don't think were meant for the initial attack itself.
Nope.
I think the explosives were purely for the engagement with law enforcement officials, and thankfully they were able to deliver some taxpayer relief shots to at least to two of these terrorists, and now we know that they've got the third in custody, and hopefully once again they'll be able to get some sort of information as to their connections and stuff, Sean.
Well, and it's also one of those things too, was the intent of the explosive that was left there, knowing that one of the things that they tell you to do in an active shooter situation is shelter in place, right? That's one of the biggest things that's on every active shooter training in the world. You shelter in place. While we went in and started shooting, you have a large enough explosive. You know people aren't running out of the building. They're hiding in their offices. You set that off. The damage you could do, if it's large enough, will be more than you could do with the gun. So, like you said, how many thousands of people are serviced there? I mean, that's the potential people that are hiding, waiting, and essentially waiting to be victimized by an explosive. So, that's a side of it to look at, too. The other thing that I think was interesting is somebody, and I don't know if it was out of fear or genius, and I don't think it was the bad guys that did it because they didn't use this to their advantage. Somebody pulled a fire alarm and set off the fire alarm system. And I was watching this, and I said, that's interesting, because what that does is, instead of it being an active shooter lockdown situation, your procedure for a firearm is totally different. It's all about evacuation at that point. So now, was somebody smart enough to say, hey, they're shooting, we got to get everyone out of here, because we've seen what's happened, they'll just come door to door and shoot you, or set off an explosion. And get people out. And if they that person's a hero. Now, it could just be simple fear, hey, we need help, and I know this will bring help. But either way, it wasn't the bad guys, because if the bad guys did it, they would have sat in the hallway and pulled it first and then let everyone come running at them and mow them down. So, that's something that, as the evidence plays out and as we look further down the line, you really, really have to look at all of the different missed opportunities from these people. Sadly, like I said, 14 dead, 17 wounded, but I think that explosive that was left there was for law enforcement and the people who were sheltering in place. I think that they had other explosives on them and I agree with you, Dan, they were either going to place number 2 and something fell apart when that cop stopped them, or it was for that initial attack with to fight law enforcement. The only problem I have with that theory is most of those devices that they use are very archaic and need to be lit with a fuse. Not very good when you're in an active gunfight. I think that they were going to a second place where those items would be implemented. Lit, rolled in, let people die, and then start shooting.
Right.
And that's really my theory behind that.
Yeah, let me run this by you. Here's more stuff coming in. People listening tonight, we're just kind of giving you the information and talking about it as we literally get it. I got 2 things for you, And I know this statement's going to set you off pretty good, Sean. This was the statement from CARE during their news conference tonight. We condemn this horrific and revolting attack and offer our heartfelt condolences to the families and loved ones of all those killed or injured. The Muslim community stands shoulder to shoulder with our fellow Americans in repudiating any twisted mindset that would claim to justify such sickening acts of violence. I'll make the one comment, and then I got one more thing. We often see, quote-unquote, moderate Muslims, quote-unquote, conservative Muslims. They refuse to say or do anything because they fear retaliation. That is why it's called terrorism, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, and
Number
you
two,
also notice he didn't use the word terrorism.
Not at all. Not at all. Now, number two, here it is. Let me get this real quick. A neighbor of Syed Farouk said that they noticed suspicious activity. They noticed a lot of packages being delivered. They noticed them being up working late into the night on something. But they did not want to report it for guess what? Fear of racial profiling.
Oh, yeah, baby. Well, and one of the other things I saw is over $30,000 in UPS uniforms have been ordered off Amazon or eBay in the last month in this country. And that's a concern, too. Because you have all these people looking out for suspicious people dropping off packages and everything. How suspicious is it if you see the UPS guy walk into a building, put a package down at the front desk, and walk away? Not at all.
Bingo.
I mean,
exactly.
So you now have, and once again, it's like everything else. Mary, I don't know what's an old myth that you're talking about, but I'll be happy to address it if you let me know. More information from the chat, sorry. It's one of those things, we see this with a lot of, you saw it with Sandy Hook, right? Everyone knew something bad was coming, but nobody wanted to address it because they were afraid to point out the obvious. The same thing happens as we've seen here. People knew that something was going on. A lot of strange packages. Well, you could say Christmas time is coming. Well, that would be great if they were Christian. Right. It doesn't exactly fit their MO from a holiday. So, again, we're afraid to say something because, we don't want to be called the Islamophobe, because that word gets thrown out there all the time, right? That's the new pedophile. They throw that out as soon as they can. Well, That's the problem in this country is we're so PC. We're so afraid to, the president says all the time, you see something, you say something. You're going to help each other. You're going to tell us so we can help you. And see something and say something. Well, somebody saw something and didn't say anything. And I'm not blaming the folks who were living next door per se, because I can see why they're afraid to say something, right? That's your neighbor. You point to them, you're like, I think they're up to no good, and it gets back to you. Well, all of a sudden, you now have to move and change your name because every CARE and every other organization in the world is going to be suing you and coming after you, et cetera, et cetera. But reality is, there has to be some sort of protection for people who see something and say something when they are wrong. And I know people say, well, that system will get abused and people will make false reports, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But you have that now anyhow. You have people that use law enforcement against loved ones and former loved ones and parents and co-parents or whatever all the time. So that's not really going to change much, other than the fact that when an ex-husband or an ex-wife claims their ex-husband is doing something he's not supposed to and uses the police as leverage even though nothing happened, not much comes out of it. But when you claim somebody may be a terrorist because they're Islamic and they have, or Middle Eastern, and have a bunch of packages being delivered, if you are wrong, you are going to get sued for a litany of things, right? The civil suit's going to be nonstop. It'll destroy you. And if you're right, we'll get to it, as we saw with the Fort Hood shooter. Danny, we're up against another break. This is flying by. I know you're going to have new information here on the shootings. I also want to talk about the anti-gun thing. I really want to get into that, and I really want to get into the Colorado thing and how quick people would come out to try to point to things that weren't exactly true. All that and more with Dan Butcher, the editor-in-chief of Pundit Press, right here on the Sackheads Radio Show. Back in a minute.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. You didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying coffee was stupid, bro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking, drinking, drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reefer of Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on SHRmedia.com. You will catch the Reefer of Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on SHRmedia.com.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And we're back here live on the SHR Media Network, the Sackheads Radio Show. I am Sackhead Sean. On the phone with me, joining me as my partner this evening, is the amazing Dan Butcher, the editor-in-chief of Pundit Press. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I know you've been on TV and radio and all this other stuff today because you were bragging on it earlier to me. What?
It's been a slow news day.
You know, we got to start looking at some of the different aspects of this. Obviously, these idiots walked in and pulled the trigger and murdered innocent lives. But, you know, one of the things that bothers me is this sort of facility, maybe I'm mistaken, I don't have 100% of all the facts on who pays the bills for that place. If this is a government facility, normally at these locations, you have very limited access. You can't just walk in off the street. Usually you have to go by some sort of guard post. Now, I will be the first one to say, as we've talked about before, private security doesn't always live up to the expectations because they're paid $9.50 an hour and are oftentimes have to walk away and leave their post abandoned for breaks, et cetera, et cetera. However, the fact that they wandered in is and I don't know how far in they got, but it scares me to think that nobody said anything. And somebody joked when I brought this up to them earlier on the phone is, well, maybe they were afraid to see something and say something that they would be deemed, Islamophobic. Oh, well, the guys walking in with the AK-47s and masks on their head, they're probably fine. But when we talk about soft targets, and we've been talking about soft targets in this country since 9/11, ad nauseum, government facilities usually aren't on that list of soft targets. Usually you have your shopping centers, your movie theaters, anywhere where the public gathers, but it's free to come and free to go. There's no real restrictions. Obviously, we've seen time and again these attacks, be it Muslim or otherwise. Even Planned Parenthood is not a soft target because more often than not, they have secured doors in the front that you have to get buzzed into and armed security at them because of incidents in which they've been attacked. Agree or disagree with what they do, I don't agree with them ever being attacked. But when you look at this facility and you're having a state event at that facility and it's wide open, it says to me that there is a massive failure in securing that site.
No, you're absolutely right, and I'm going to use this, the state of Texas versus the state of California, and you can answer this for me, Sean. This will kind of be a question back towards you. Here in the state of Texas, if you visit a lot of our government buildings, you're going to have to pass the security, metal detector, etc. These were common sense measures that were put in place as a result of 9/11. And so here in the state of Texas, in a lot of facilities such as this, especially government facilities, more than likely you're going to be met with some form of armed resistance should you try to pull something like this in a government building.
Right.
Now, on the flip side of that, looking at some of the, and I'm going to use the mental hospital that we have here in my hometown, no armed security at all. Now, it is part of the hospital system, and there is security at the hospital, but they're not armed security. There's no armed security whatsoever at the mental facility there. So although the doors are locked and such, and you do have to go through checkpoints and stuff like that, but once again, I'm going to assume that was probably the same case for this particular target that was chosen today. It was chosen specifically because they knew that they would not meet any sort of armed resistance on their way into their target. If they had chosen to attack another facility in California, such as a courthouse or something like that, Sean, I would probably bet that even in the state of California that they have armed security at the courthouse and other type of government facilities such as that. But even though that this was a state, this was actually a county facility, the type of facility it was, they did not did not have the need for armed security. Even though they probably did have to go through checkpoints and stuff like that. That would be the same here with the same type of medical facilities that we have. So, and we see this time and time again. Look at the targets that they are choosing. The Boston Bombers obviously chose a very popular sporting event in our country that they knew, even though there would be armed police. Target rich, even though there's armed police officers on the street and stuff, they knew that they would be far and in between, and that they had plenty of victims that they could get the mass destruction, the most victims they possibly can with the types of devices that they could use. Whether it was shooting up a movie theater, a school. Obviously, I would consider, even though the recent Planned Parenthood attack. I would classify that more as the attack of a very seriously mental ill individual.
Yeah.
There's a lot of instances that just because of where the attack actually started and where it progressed to. So there's a lot of different reasons for that type of attack. But in most of these cases, the terrorist have kind of taken a look at what we would call these random single lone wolf killers. They've looked at them and said, "Hey, look at these single individuals have extracted mass casualties, mass carnage, mass death with just one person." What we saw in this attack today on this facility in California was the exact same tactic that we saw carried out in Paris, France. The exact same type of targets. They knew when they went in, the first target was a cafe, and then, of course, it moved to the auditorium where they were having the concert. They knew they would meet no resistance. They would meet no armed resistance whatsoever. And then once they were in, they could inflict the most damage, murderous rampage they possibly can. And we saw what they did with the amount of shooters they did. Of course, in that case, you had over 120 people killed in that instance. But here today, we had 3 people, ended up killing 14 people, injuring and wounding another 17. Of those 17, 10 are critically wounded.
Yep.
So we will see. There's no doubt we'll see the death toll go up from this incident today. But once again, they're picking soft targets where they know they're not going to meet any resistance. And Sean, the terrorists here, particularly these sleeper cells, the Obama administration is going to continue to say, you know what, our biggest worry is climate change and maybe the occasional redneck that goes on a shooting spree.
Right.
That lone wolf. But in reality, the biggest threat that we have is ISIS.
Right.
The sleeper cells that we have here, Islamic terrorism. That's what we saw today, Sean.
Well,
and it's going to get more prevalent with bigger casualties. We've been saying the terrorist attack is coming. I think this was the warm-up act that we saw today. And Sean, it's not if, but when we're going to see another mass attack on the magnitude that we saw at 9/11.
Well, I just want to say, honestly, you must be an Islamophobe. Listen.
Yes. You know what? If that's what I am, so be it. So be it. If I'm racially profiling, so be it. We need to be profiling.
Right.
We don't need to be profiling children at the airports. We don't need to be profiling little old women. We don't need to be profiling, disabled people in wheelchairs. Folks, those are not the ones carrying out the terrorist attack.
Well,
the ones carrying out the terrorist attacks are the same people that Barack Obama claims to be women and children refugees that he's trying to bring into this country.
Well,
which, by the way, over 99% are young Syrian men.
Yeah, but that's a stat nobody wants to talk about. I think Larry the Cable Guy said it best when he was talking about airport security. It was like the biggest difference between a terrorist and a baby is the terrorist has the diaper on his head. You have to know the difference.
Sean, you're an Islamophobe.
I know. One of the things that I think is time to start taking seriously in this country is hardening soft targets, and I think this is another reason to have that discussion. You go into any shopping center, sporting event, all the sporting events usually have a pretty high law enforcement contingency, but you go to shopping centers, anywhere where people congregate, very rarely is there any sort of armed protection there. Oftentimes, these are the same places that refuse to allow people to carry their own protection with them. One of the things that I have learned through my years in another life and another job is part of the thing is the people who sign the paychecks for these facilities, all they care about in one way or another is selling a product. And guns make a couple people feel icky, and what if we lose a couple dollars from those people who feel icky? They don't worry, they don't look far enough down the road as to what happens if there's an active shooter. When we have seen time and again, when there's an active shooter and there's armed resistance, it has ended very quickly. Very quickly. And we've seen private folks stop it. We've seen law enforcement stop it. We've seen a combination of the two. I think up in Oregon just recently, last year sometime, there was a private citizen who engaged a potential active shooter as well as a police officer at almost the exact same time. So you see them in front of banks. You see them all over in California in front of banks. You see security guards with guns. You see security guards with guns protecting large amounts of money on Brinks trucks and trucks like that. Where you see armed resistance, and California is the prime example, right? One of the biggest anti-gun states in the country, the most stringent gun laws, the most just crazy gun lunatics in the world. But where do you see guns? Where the money walks and the bullshit talks? At the State House? Right. Protecting the high-end politician and protecting the money itself, but not when it's protecting the average people. Because that costs a little bit more money, and if that happens, we have insurance. And a lot of times, I'm not saying they're complicit, but there's definitely something to be said about these soft targets remaining soft. And people, you can't have guns everywhere. You go to parts of Europe, you walk through a mall, and there are guys walking around with MP5s. They're security guards. Why do they walk around with MP5s? Because they know that the attack could come. We need all these gun nuts who are out there right now yelling against guns. Oh, you can't have more guns, and guns are the problem, blah, 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 blah. How much do you want to bet that these terrorists, and even the guy in Colorado, legally possessed the weapons that they used? I am going to say slim to none. One of the arguments that I had earlier with my Facebook liberal friend was, they have that smart gun system. Well, that's great, but now everybody, when I walk in public, if I'm wearing the bracelet that you have to wear to get your gun to work in this new gun smart technology, everyone there is going to know I have a gun. How many times am I going to be harassed because somebody's going to call the police and be like, there's a guy with a gun on him, and the police are going to show up, and they have to do their job. I'm not knocking the police for it. They have to make sure I'm not a bad guy, and I understand that. However, what happens when I need that gun and it doesn't work? I mean, for God's sakes, Windows that has been around for 20-something years now doesn't work every single time I turn it on. Right. What the hell what do you believe that a friggin' bracelet is going to work every single time? And if it doesn't work when I damn well need it, what happens then? I'm dead. Or I could be dead, or somebody else could be dead. These gun laws enhancements, and it's just common sense gun laws, blah, blah. Yeah, gun owners shouldn't mind because they can pass the background check and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but they're not the ones who are committing these acts. Time and again, FBI statistics shows you it's not the legal gun owners that do things like this. Very, very rarely does a legal gun owner use his gun illegally. It happens. I'm not saying it never happens, but the statistics are so damn small, it's off the table. The reality of the situation is most people who commit crimes with guns should not have legally possessed the gun. That is a reality. These three assholes in San Bernardino, I can almost bet dollars to donuts, should probably have not possessed the gun, outside of the guy who worked for the state because he went through a background check in the last 2 years. So legal precedents, okay, maybe. But if the gun was fully automatic, then he should not have possessed it because fully automatic weapons are banned in California without a special permit that nobody can get. They also had explosives. They're completely outlawed in California, yet these idiots still possessed them. So don't tell me that these laws are going to do anything but restrict gun owners from having guns, legal gun owners, the right people who do the right thing with them for whatever reason. Let's not even have that conversation because it's bullshit. It's a straw man. You are attacking, I say it all the time, I must have bought the laziest guns in the world. They've never shot anybody. You are attacking a false, an inanimate object who can't defend itself, and that's why you're attacking it. And then when people like me defend it, you get called every name in the world, and literally I was told tonight that if I don't support smart gun legislation, I am part of the problem, i.e. I have blood in my hands every time a gun is used. That is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it is the narrative, it is the Alinsky-esque approach that gun nuts jump on.
Bingo.
and now you've got me worked up, so I'm going to go on a rant for a couple of minutes to follow that up. The first narrative that you heard today was the liberals/progressives immediately went into gun confiscation mode. Liberal progressive politicians are constantly trying to enact gun control legislation, and then you have the majority of them, including Obama and Hillary Clinton. They want to confiscate people's guns. And, in some states, they've effectively limited the size of magazines. They've made it extremely difficult to ship guns. They're trying to make it more difficult for individuals to sell guns to each other. They're even trying to limit access to ammunition. These are facts on the ground that even the Democrats won't argue with. In fact, they boast proudly of it.
Yep.
Fortunately, apart from some liberal infestations such as, Boston, Chicago, D.C., and New York City, the majority of Americans oppose these kind of actions, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly shot them down when they've been challenged. A few things come to mind, as liberals/progressives continue to push their gun confiscation agenda. In 1994, the assault weapons ban passed under President Bill Clinton. That piece of legislation, which is now sunsetted into the history books and having no discernible effect on crime even when active, was one of the big reasons the Democrats got their asses handed to them in the 1994 midterm elections. President Obama's past boast about not wanting to take our guns away is certainly accepted by his liberal followers, apologists, and worshipers. But they recognize that their polls need to tell lies in order to get past the unbelievers' obstructionism. Sean, there's over 350 million guns in this country. Now, while every new firearm sale and every transfer through a licensed dealer requires record keeping, transfers between individuals a lot of times do not. So apart from those jurisdictions that require registrations, there's no way the government could, in effect, affect an effective confiscation program without full compliance by the public. I'll point this out, that New York State's attempt to get black guns registered seems to have about a 5% compliance rate. Connecticut's compliance rate is in the low teens. The liberal gun grabbers can dream, but their more practical counterparts know that it's a sure loser of an issue.
Yep.
Even if Hillary wins the White House, I doubt she would actually attempt confiscation, even though she continues to boast about it. The eternally unaddressed and underaddressed observation, if the crime in places with strict gun laws is driven by people smuggling gun in from places with lax gun restrictions, why isn't crime higher in those lax places? Why would the criminals go through the trouble and the risk of all the travel when they could simply one-stop shop?
Yep.
I.e. commit their crimes where they buy the guns. Might it be that they just might be aware that others in the lax area might have guns as well? Now, of course, let me point this out. The trends support a robust concept of armed defense. In the past couple of decades, 40 states have passed right-to-carry laws. Many to most have seen crime decreases, and not one of them has seen an increase in crime. But once again, gun control is one of those topics where the liberals and their version of quote-unquote common sense trumps empirical data and history. The gun banners, quote, know that allowing greater access to guns is certain to create crime, to turn the law-abiding into macho vigilantes, to prompt Old West-style shootouts, to greatly spike the number of people killed by their own guns. They, quote, know that they argue these points by claiming that they're obvious. They forget the facts or the statistics, which they dismiss either by attacking the source, declaring without evidence that they've all been fudged, or declaring again without evidence that they could just as easily find stats that support their positions. This reminds me of an old gag from college math and science classes. You start solving the problem, then write the answer, and then claim that it's intuitively obvious. Too bad the professors don't give credit for intuitively obvious. the problem with gun control laws and the statistics, if there's really no hypothesis, if guns were banned in total, 100% of the crimes would be committed by illegal gun owners. If there were no gun control laws, 100% of the crimes would be committed by legal gun owners. You have to remember that human behavior has far more to do with it than anything else. If a criminal seeks to accomplish something, he's going to do it if motivated enough. However, guns can deter a spontaneous event. We've seen it recently, just here in the last couple of weeks. We had an incident where a gentleman went in to try to rob a Burger King. A licensed gun owner was in there, pulled his weapon, and stopped the robbery. A 13-year-old recently delivered a taxpayer relief shot to a career criminal who broke into his house and threatened his life.
Yeah, the woman breastfeeding her kids a couple weeks ago. The woman breastfeeding her kid. The guy came in with a gun and she killed him and got shot in the process.
Exactly. And once again, the long story short is that guns in the hands of responsible people will either do harm or possibly help. Guns or anything else for that matter in the hands of the irresponsible and criminal element will do no good and they're guaranteed to do harm. To me, that's the simple truth about gun control. It's the government trying to fix a problem, except the problem is a symptom, and it's not the source of the problem to start with, Sean. You and I and the rest of our listeners, and I think the majority of Americans, they're not stupid, contrary to what liberals and progressives might think. The District of Columbia, where our good friend Ken McClinton lives, has all kinds of strict gun controls, and yet they also have the nation's highest per capita gun violence.
Yep, Chicago.
Exactly. There are places with few or no gun controls which are in the middle of the pack or low in gun violence.
Yep.
Once again, it is proven where you enact strict gun controls, the violence increases. We have
Look
seen
at
that
Australia.
in Chicago. Exactly. Australia, Baltimore, Chicago, Washington, D.C.
London.
Once again, regardless of what they tell you, guns in responsible people's hands deter crime, and they also deter incidents like we saw today.
I agree. Listen, Australia is one of the biggest ones for me. You look at their increase in person-on-person crime, violent crime, and crimes with firearms since they banned guns, 10 years ago, 8 years ago now? It has gone through the roof. I mean, you're talking 10, 12, 15%. In a country with a small population, Australia doesn't have a large population, but it's still staggering statistics-wise to see the amount of crime that's increased. There's a reason that London is starting to arm its cops, and they're actually starting to talk more and more about repealing the gun ban. These reasons are there because the statistics are there. We know in Chicago, and I say it all the time, you do an overlay map of the most stringent gun control in this country, and it overlays almost perfectly with the highest gun violence and gun crimes. It lines up almost city by city. Detroit, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, L.A., Oakland, San Francisco, places like that, Seattle, all of those places have serious gun violence. The only two exceptions to the rule are Atlanta, Georgia, and New Orleans. However, a majority of the crimes committed with guns down there are being committed by people who should not possess them to begin with. So either way, the argument stands. Statistically, the argument stands. And if people in public places or that own public buildings aren't going to stiffen up and really build up the protection for their facility and make it a hard target versus a soft target, then the average person needs to do it for themselves. That's just the way it works. We're up against a break. When we come back, I want to wrap up the show. I also want to talk a little bit about the NFL because I want to end on a light note. and get my blood pressure down before I walk out the door. Actually, this is going to get my blood pressure back up through the roof, but it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about all that and more right here on the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. That you didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cough for the stupid bro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking, drinking, drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reefer of Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time. Every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on SHRmedia.com, you will catch the Reefer of Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on SHRmedia.com.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here's Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And we're back at the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. Thank you so much for talking with us and hanging with us this evening. Hanging out in the live chat. Thank you so much to those great folks that are in the live chat, because you guys really make this so much more enjoyable between your knowledge, your sense of humor, and all the other stuff that you bring to the table. Insanity on some levels, but that's only specifically for Kel Fritzy. I really appreciate you guys hanging out and spending time with us. Listen, this tragedy that happened in San Bernardino is just that to the victims. It's a tragedy. But it doesn't change the fact that we're having the wrong arguments in this country time and again. We keep talking about gun control. We keep talking about not hurting people's feelings. We keep talking about any active shooter incident or terrorist incident as a couple bad players. We keep talking about all these things because of political correctness and because of BS to try to hide from the truth. Insane people do insane things. If you're insane because of your religious ideology, if you're insane because somewhere in the back of your head there's somebody else, Son of Sam type thing, all these different reasons. But the people that are committing these acts are the problem, not the implement or the device that they use to do it. They're inanimate objects. we need to start looking introspectively as a country as to what the real problems we have and threats we have against our children and our people. It's not climate change. It's not, I don't want a president that's a weatherman. And that's something that I saw on Facebook and a couple other places that made me laugh. Like, if this guy spent more time worrying about terrorism than he does about the weather, we might actually get somewhere. Right. We need to look at our immigration policies. My argument earlier is if we hit the magic gun go bye-bye button, and this country was completely null and void of guns tomorrow, they all evaporated. The simple fact of the matter is they'd be pouring in over our southern border in about 10 minutes. And when you are talking to your liberal friends or liberal adversaries, whatever, about that, and you talk about securing our border, bring up the illegal guns that come over the border as well. Hey, you know what? We're not just securing it to stop the Mexicans from coming here to try to get jobs. It's not about that. We're trying to make sure that, A, we have a fair system for people trying to get into this country, a safe system for the people that already live here, but B, the drugs and the guns, and the drugs that lead to a lot of gun violence in cities that have high gun restrictions in this country come in over our southern border. A lot of guns come in over our southern border. And all of that's a big issue. I mean, look at right after France, we had, Honduras, where there was 4 Syrians stopped trying to get north. The threat is real from the southern border, and it's something that needs to be brought up into this argument. We need to start being realistic about our security in this country. And listen, I hate going to the airport and get a pat down. We talk about the TSA all the time. We talk about it for a reason. But the other side of it is we have to be safe. And I'm not saying I want to live in Gestapo land, but what I'm saying is we need to start implementing controls for bad players, and we need to start loosening the grasp on the good people in this country and their right to defend themselves. And it is a fine balance.
Yeah, Sean, there's simple, the key word here being common sense measures. Simple common sense measures that we can put in place to increase our security without having to, once again, turn this into a controlled state, where you basically are trying to declare martial law in the name of everybody's security. Right. Although, maybe the progressives would like to see that. That way they could implement their version of gun control in our country. But simple, common sense measures. Number one, here's a bright idea. Enforce the laws already on the books when it comes to immigration, when it comes to guns, yes, etc., when it comes to crime. Enforce the laws on the books. Number two, as much as this is such a taboo word, but profiling needs to be done. Profiling is how you solve crimes. Profiling is how you be proactive in preventing crimes. Profiling is how you are being proactive instead of reactive in preventing terrorist attacks like that happened today in San Bernardino. We have to be proactive, but being proactive and using some common sense measures, does that mean that we have to give up our freedoms? No. That's the last thing we want to do. Right. We don't want to give up our freedoms. We want to maintain our freedom of speech, our freedom of the press, our freedom of religion in our country. Because if we don't, Sean, if we don't maintain our freedoms, if we don't continue living our lives, if we decide to shelter in place, hide from the terrorists, then they have won. That's what they want. They want us to live in fear. That's why it's called terrorism. If we continue to live our lives, if we continue our pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, if we continue believing in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom to be who you want to be in this country, then we can defeat the terrorists and they lose. But if you listen to Barack Obama, if you listen to Hillary Clinton, that's not what they want. We will lose if we follow their leadership and their guidance in these matters. And, Sean, I will bring this up real quick. Tonight, Saeed Farouk's brother-in-law, and this is actually his name, Farhan Khan, Farhan, and then the last name Khan, Khan. He delivered a statement. And I think this statement is very important. And then after this, we can discuss your team losing to a second-string quarterback last week. This is what Saeed Farouk's brother-in-law said. I have no idea why he would do something like this. I have absolutely no idea. I'm in shock myself. That once again shows that the Muslim community continues to turn a blind eye to the very thing that continues to plague them. They don't understand that they are the victims as well in all of this. Right. They refuse to acknowledge it because guess what? They have chosen to give up freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of anything. They have given up their freedoms. They have surrendered to the radical Islamic terrorist, and that we cannot do. I also want to confirm one more thing, Sean, and that is that we do have it confirmed that Farouk was at the holiday event for county employees at the facility, and then he, quote, abruptly left. That's something we were talking about earlier, but it is actually confirmed that he was present, then abruptly left, and now we know that he came back with 2 other individuals and started the mass shooting and murderous rampage that they undertook this afternoon.
And I'm sure that when they start pulling text messages, they'll find the communications telling him to come outside and get ready and go back in. The old, not the old saying, but it was said brilliantly, is those who would exchange freedom for security deserve neither, and I 100% agree with that. And like you said, this sort of thing, it affects everyone. In the brother-in-law's statement, one of the things that we talked about earlier, and maybe this could be a particular player in this, is how well they are hiding it before they commit these acts so they do not tip people off that it is coming. Because if this Mr. Khan is 100% truthful about this and really believes that nothing changed in his behavior, then he hid it from them as well. And that tells you the scariness of it because, we talk about criminal behavior and mental illness, and we hear about people saying, oh, I knew this was coming, I knew that was coming, et cetera, et cetera. When people don't know it's coming, and if that's a tactic they're going to start using to try to mask their horrific behavior, and not yelling Allahu Akbar as you run in and start shooting the place up, their tactics are changing because they know we are starting to catch on their tactics, and they know they have to keep changing. One of the things that I've always said, too, had the discussion earlier today with a very, very intelligent woman, and she said, why do they do it? Like, her concern while all this was going on, as I was talking to her, she's like, I hope they don't drive an hour and a half east and start hitting Disneyland. And I said, no, they will never do that, and here is why. After 9/11, they learned that when you poke the bear too much, massive public opinion is going to be retribution. As much as the liberals on the left don't want to believe this, they all called for retribution after 9/11. Many of the Democrats today who speak against the Iraq War voted for it, and they like to turn around and try to say it was under the guise of false information. Reality is what it is. They wanted retribution too because we were attacked. The terrorists know this, and they know for a fact that if they commit a huge act, which is why you don't see, I don't think you'll see attacks on schools from them. They know there will be a line. Look, in the eyes of people today, and I can tell you, as crass as this might sound, it's horrible. But the average person will say, "Oh, that was 14 adults who were killed, and that's a shame." Turn that into 14 children, and it changes people's emotion on it. They know that they don't want people who are trying to be intellectuals, even though they're not, they're dunces most of the time, who are protecting them and afraid to step up to them or trying to err on the side of political correctness. They know that once they push them into the emotional anger, that hellfire and brimstone will rain down upon them. Proof is France. France was minimally helping prior to the ISIS attack in France. They were moving their warship into the region before the attack, which is one of the reasons they believe the attack took place. But they weren't leading the charge, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, until the attack happened in France. And then you're seeing nonstop bombardment by the French military on ISIS position because they awoke the bear. They poked the bear until it started to bite in France. They don't want to do that again. They will never do it. You will never see, and I hate to say it, you'll never see death toll in a single incident here above 20, 25. It's just the way it's going to be, because they know once they cross that line, or that wrong person is killed, or that child is killed, the public image of this will turn around from being a couple bad players to we have a terrorism problem.
But Sean, I'll make this argument, and I'll use this example. With the current president that we have occupying the Oval Office, you will never see a response to a terrorist attack like that.
Doesn't matter.
You'll never see a George W. Bush type attack.
Doesn't matter.
Response.
Because the guy's less than a year left. It doesn't matter. They know we'll be that angry until it happens. They know that we'll be that angry until it happens.
Right.
And they know that this disdain and this exhaustion from war that this country's in, and the fact that people just don't want to do anything but war, will go away if they do the wrong thing. They are not stupid. Right. They're animals, but they're not stupid animals. They are very intelligent. They are very sophisticated, I hate to say. This attack today proves it. It's going to absolutely be very, very minimal, one at a time, small attacks, death by 1,000 paper cuts.
And I will make the argument that you're going to see the attacks in France dramatically decrease. You're going to see the attacks in the UK and in Europe dramatically decrease. And here is why. The French are being proactive in attacking Islamic State targets. The UK just today voted to join in with France in attacking, and we're not talking about just strategic pinprick attacks. They are going at the heart of the Islamic State. They're going after their oil depots, their transportation hubs, their training camps, everything. That is what you're seeing. You're going to see the attacks against them decrease because they know, the Islamic State knows that there's going to be a response. I think here in the United States, because you're going to see the number of attacks decrease there, we're going to see the number of attacks increase here. And here's why. Barack Obama, during a recent, what was supposed to be a recent bombing raid of an oil transport of over 100 Islamic oil tankers, trucks, 45 minutes before the attack, our military was ordered to drop warnings to them. And the warning stated, get out of your trucks, run, or you will be killed. So we have our own president warning who should be our enemy. And they know that, and I think because of the lack of response that they will see from Barack Obama, I think you will see these type of attacks that we saw today dramatically increase here in the homeland. And remember, once again, they will continue to claim that the Islamic State poses, even after today, that they pose no threat whatsoever to the homeland. The only thing that poses a threat to us is the weather and the temperature changing tomorrow, Sean. That is what you're going to hear.
No, I agree with you. And listen, as the days roll on and these little attacks start to happen more and more, and I agree with you, it's going to happen, and we're just not prepared for it. But one of the things that you said in your great analysis of everything was you were talking about oil convoys, transportation hubs, training centers. Right. That's one of the things that I think the average person in this country misses, is exactly and how well equipped ISIS is. They have transportation hubs. They have oil convoys. They have training. They're military bases, essentially. They have a branch that does just counter-electronics warfare. All these different things that they do. They have a recruiting branch. We picture them as a ragtag team kind of running around with just a couple of guns between 20 of them, hoping to get something that'll stick, when the reality is they are very well organized, they are very well educated, they are very well equipped, and they are not afraid. And by the way, you can't negotiate with them because they live by an ideology that the next place they go is 10 times better than this one. They want to die for the cause. We can't.
Right.
That's another thing we do not understand in this country. The average person cannot even comprehend that. So they can't comprehend what drives them. They believe that they are going to get their 72 virgins, live in the land of milk and honey for eternity, and be a hero. That is what they think is waiting for them on the other side. So they are not afraid to die for their cause. And I will leave it there because I have 10 minutes for football.
Sounds good to me. Let's talk football. Are we gonna talk about the Patriots losing their first game, or how bad the Dallas Cowboys suck?
Well, first of all, I heard that Tony Romo broke his fallopian tube, and I hope that heals nicely in the offseason.
He did. Well, you know what? It's December, so something was bound to happen to Romo. He was either going to get hurt or he was going to throw a ton of interceptions, and he did both in that game. But in all seriousness, I actually think we've seen two things, and I know you got something you want to talk about. But
go ahead.
I think there were two dramatic developments over this weekend. I think number one, I think you saw the end of Tony Romo's career. I will be the first to say it on the air now. I think he's done. I think his collarbone and his arm are too fragile, and I think he's done. I think Peyton Manning is done as well. I was joking, and I know I kind of got razzed by Ag in the chat room. I said it in jest that Tom Brady was beaten by a second-string quarterback, but that was not any ordinary second-string quarterback that took over for Peyton Manning. That is the heir to the throne in Denver that took over for Peyton Manning. A young man that's going to be a very accomplished future quarterback for the Broncos. So the Patriots had nothing to hang their heads about with that loss, other than the horrid officiating.
And that's what I want to get down to. You know, I say it all the time. 1 or 2 bad calls, your team should be able to respond. But when it seems like every bad call went against the Patriots, LaFell, the holding on LaFell in the overtime quarter was atrocious, not called. Yes. Gronkowski being called for offensive pass interference when he bumped within the first 5 yards, which every single back does, was ridiculous. Bent arm bump is completely acceptable. Even, you know, it's bad when Collinsworth, who is one of the biggest Patriots haters out there, could barely find a reason why the penalty was there and really had a stretch on 3 of them. Like, well, that's kind of borderline. You know it's bad because normally he's like, oh no, that's a flagrant foul when it's the Patriots. So I said this, and I'll say this time and again. The Patriots are 10-0 against the NFL and 0-1. I'm sorry, against NFL teams and 0-1 against the NFL. I think it's a hack job. I really do. And now you find out that the other horrid officiating squad that everyone's been complaining about in the league has been pushed to their next Monday night game, and the other team was swapped out. I think this is Goodell saying we're going to get even with the Patriots, and we're going to make them suffer.
Let me tell you about that, Sean. Now that you bring up, first of all, let's talk. Let me remind everybody about Gronk. He suffered a bruised knee in that game. He is actually day to day. He may miss the next game.
Right.
But he'll certainly be back the following week. It was not a serious injury. It was a bruised knee, so he will be back.
Oh.
Now let's talk about the game coming up this weekend between the Eagles and the Patriots. Of course, a lot of people are familiar with the difficulties that Pete Morelli's crew has had this year. You mentioned that that the crew had been removed from Sunday night's game between the Colts and the Steelers. Sean, let me tell you what game they've been reassigned to.
The Eagles and Patriots game.
The Eagles and the Patriots. Congratulations, buddy.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
You.
No, I know. It's sad and pathetic. And look, I say it all the time. If you had even borderline officiating last Sunday night, the Patriots would have won that game hands down. It was just atrocious. That second half, there were more horrific calls and non-calls against Denver. It was out of control. Denver's offensive line was reeling. You had that call on Gronk that would have been a 25-yard pass. all these different things. So I can't believe anyone can look me in the eye, and I don't care how bad you hate the Patriots, and you and I were talking about this during the game, and you agreed with me. That was a hack job by the Zebras out there.
Right. And let me point this out. Who do you think has been called for the most offensive pass interference penalties this year in the NFL? It has been Gronk.
Yep, and almost all of them were that same thing. And I think,
exactly.
I've heard two different train of thoughts. One, they're trying to contain him because it's Gronk and he's just a powerhouse. But two, his size and speed is so off-putting to NFL referees because he looks like he should not be able to move like that they're almost mentally jinxed into calling it and not realizing that if he was 70 pounds lighter and a little slower, they would never call that again. And part of the problem is he is getting off the line so quickly that the defenders cannot start their retreat fast enough that you're going to have contact. But within the first 5 yards, it's illegal to have bump and run. It's totally legal.
Exactly. And let me tell you, Gronk plays a similar game to Jason Witten of the Dallas Cowboys. Jason Witten, very quick. Once he gets into the open field, very, very quick. Tight end. And of course, he's a Hall of Famer. There's no doubt that Gronk will be a Hall of Famer as well. They both play almost an identical game. But here's the thing. Jason Witten has this reputation of being a clean player, even though he does do a lot of push-offs, a lot of holding, a lot of hands. Of course, the defensive players are doing the same to him. They're letting him play the game, but in a similar circumstance, a player playing a similar game, almost an identical tight end game with Gronk for the Patriots. Here you have playing an identical game, but you can tell that there is no doubt that he is being targeted and that the Patriots are being targeted because why? The NFL was so embarrassed with what happened in Deflategate, and everything went against them with that.
Well, and it's amazing too, right? They try to throw Brady and Belichick under the bus for Deflategate,
right?
When there was no evidence that they did it. They completely ignore the fact that their own officials were handling the balls during the game, and they should have known something was wrong with the balls. You can't tell me that the NFL officials don't know how to feel a ball and tell whether or not it's inflated enough. They hold it just as much as the quarterbacks do. And then when they slam Brady with this gigantic suspension, and they don't turn around and do anything more to Ray Rice than a 4-game suspension for knocking his girlfriend out cold in an elevator. Right. What did they think that was going to happen? What do they think was going to happen? Of course the judge is going to look at it and say, no, this is treated completely unfairly. You had no hard evidence. There's no justification for the suspension. And people forget this too. Unlike Major League Baseball, that's a private entity, NFL is a non-profit organization.
Right.
And they aren't controlled necessarily the same way as private rules. So, it kind of changes a lot of things. I think you're going to see, I think Goodell is gone by the end of the year. I really think that end of the year he is done. He has been such an embarrassment. And listen, it's not just the Patriots where some strange things have happened or not happened. I mean, you look at how they handled the incident with the hazing incident with the Miami Dolphins. You had hazing in a locker room between two players, and the league's going to get involved in it? It's absolutely ridiculous. So, it's just the NFL is going to lose more fans over stuff like this, and I say it all the time. This year it's the Patriots, but 2 or 3 years, whatever team is on top and winning, it could be them as well.
Right. And Sean, I know we're up against the clock, but I'm going to make these two predictions to close it out. The New England Patriots are going to dial it up a notch. They're going to go 15-1 through the rest of the season. They're going to cruise through the playoffs. They will repeat as Super Bowl champions, despite what the NFL is throwing at them. On the flip side of that, the darlings of the NFL this year, the Carolina Panthers, they are the worst team in the history of the NFL ever to start 11-0. They will not finish the season undefeated. They will get a first-round bye, but they will lose in the second round of the playoffs and will not make the Super Bowl.
Well, you know what, and I know I'm up. I got to tell you though, I like that kid Cam Newton for a quarterback.
I do too.
I'll tell you what, kid.
I'd like to have him. I'd like to have him as a Dallas Cowboy, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, I don't think there's any team out there that would absolutely say no to that kid. He's got arm, he's got speed, he's got brains. He seems to be a genuine person, which I always like in a quarterback, or I always like in a sports personality. And I think he has so much damn fun at that game. You can tell when he plays, and that's the one thing I really think the Panthers have going for them is that kid is going to be a superstar for a long time to come.
You know what? In our luck, Jerry Jones is going to trade for Johnny Manziel and think he can reform him.
Well, here's the good part is we know where Manziel will be when you need him, and all you have to do is go to the local rehab clinic.
Or pay his bail money.
Dan Butcher, editor-in-chief of Pundit Press, my co-host this evening on the Sackheads Radio Show. Make sure you check out Pundit Press all the time. They're still updating on the San Bernardino incident. We will have more information to come as time goes on. Thank you to all the folks in chat roll who listen this evening. Make sure you check out RFB Radio, The Unpleasant Blind Guy, of course the Exceptional Conservative, Jersey Joe, and that many more, all of them right here on the SHR Media Network. I'm Sackhead Sean. We will talk to you next week.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America. Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here too. But for those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio. The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.